All right, welcome back to another NAFI Mentor Live. This is our 97th broadcast, if you can believe it. We've got a really good one for you this month. My name is Aaron Dabney, the coordinator of the Mentor Live program, a NAFI board member, and an active instructor. Glad you chose to join us. As I said, really good program this month. I've been excited about this one ever since Mark and I began talking about this at Oshkosh. We've got Mark Hanson, president of the Air Care Alliance tonight, talking about finding your why, promoting volunteer flying safety. This is a topic that a lot of us in the instruction world know just a little bit about, but I had no idea until I got to know Mark just how organized these organizations are in this national picture called Air Care Alliance. So he's going to have a really worthwhile message for us tonight. As always, a few housekeeping items for you. Earn wings credit, but I'll talk about that in just a minute because as you know, we're still in the middle of the government shutdown, but that will still be an option, I promise. As always, you don't have to be a NAFI member to be a Mentor Live participant, but if you're not a NAFI member, consider joining us. Don't have to be an instructor to be a NAFI member, and if you're serious about improving aviation safety by improving flight instruction, then we want you as a NAFI member. It's a really simple process there on the website to join in. We, as always, welcome your questions and comments. I'll show you here in a second how to join the chat. I just realized I got one more slide I want to show you. Speaking of wings, you'll notice on the broadcast page, if you're watching this live on October 15th of 2025, that the wings link is not there yet. That's because there's no guarantee when the credit might be approved. So go ahead and put your little sticky note on your monitor. And as soon as the government's back open again, hop back on here, take your wings quiz, and as always, you'll get your credit. So to join our chat, if you'll click on the little chat icon there on the bottom of the page, and then make sure you let us know your name first before you ask your question. We always get some names there at the beginning of a question. So give us your name, then ask your question. Our chair emeritus, Bob Mader, is there in the chat tonight instigating things. And when you ask questions, he's going to make sure that they get in front of me, and I'll make sure they get in front of Mark. One more thing that I want to tell you about is our very first NAFI Summit, the 2023 Summit. We've got all 28 of our presentations archived, and I'll give you a second there. If you'll take a picture of that QR code, you can watch all 28 of those. So you've got a lot of work to do and get wings credit for every single one of those. So that's a really good resource. Again, completely free that we want to give you, our viewers. So again, really happy to have Mark with us tonight. Mark is, as I said, a FAASTeam rep and the president of the Air Care Alliance. And I'll introduce him to you here briefly. Obviously, a very accomplished volunteer pilot. He's flown over 500 missions. And I'll let him tell you about the variety of things and living things that he's carried, everything from cancer patients to turtles. That's pretty cool to me. Like I said, president of ACA. And ACA, like I said, is responsible for promoting over 60 different volunteer organizations. And I think you'll be surprised at what's actually out there in terms of opportunities for us as pilots to give back to the public. Mark's a commercial pilot, instrument-rated pilot, and single-engine land, multi-engine land, and single-engine sea. So we had some fun talking about seaplanes before we hopped on camera tonight. And he's also type rated on the Eclipse 50, which has been fun to learn about. And he's a proud lifetime member of AOPA and EAA as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Mark. You have the flight controls.
I have the flight controls, and I may not have mouse control anymore after our re-login technical glitch there. So we'll see if that works. But
okay, if not, we'll take care of you on my end.
Yeah. Yep. So here we go. I'm getting it back, and I've got it back. Let's see if it works. And there it is. So again, nice to be here. Thanks for everyone for allowing me to give you guys an introduction to what Air Care Alliance does and all of our members. It's definitely a privilege. So one of the questions I wanted to ask right away is, what do you guys find the most fun and rewarding when you're working with your clients? And I took a shot at it that it may be something that I also find working with our mentoring our pilots, which is we like to see our peers passionate, committed, and really seeking mastery on a regular basis. And in this case, we have an opportunity to share a purpose. The community comes together, and it's very hard to describe how committed you get once you start meeting people that you're serving or animals that you're flying, or any number of things that you can do as a volunteer. So our call to action today is we do share goals. Whether you're a volunteer pilot or instructor, we want to create awareness. It gives us an opportunity to find a passion or a why, and engage pilots of all types, whether they're just starting out or whether they're doing their recurrence or just general training. And we want to promote safety. Obviously, that's a never-ending task or need. And again, we can use all of this to find a common why with our peers or our students. Again, volunteering, it just gives you something to talk about on a regular basis. And it's always talking about the impact that you have. It's just kind of an amazing experience.
They said, well,
we'll dive into an example here.
I go, fly me for free. It doesn't happen.
It was something that really just helped us out and gave us a lot of peace, and knowing that we don't have to have stressful hours on the road, and we can get right here and get her to her appointments and set up her surgeries.
Parents are driving 8 hours each way to go to get treatment. Today we're able to do the flight in an hour. So it's very hard to describe how we're giving that family hope and a better existence with just a small amount of effort on our part.
So that little girl is now actually 8, and she started out life on the left here, week 1, going right into, or day 1, going right into open heart surgery. Her parents are New York State troopers, and during prenatal care all the way through month 8, they didn't know that there were free services to fly them from upstate New York to Boston for care, and they were doing 8 to 11-hour drives every time to get down to care, spend a week and then repeat that going back home. And instead we were, able to start doing that in an hour. So again, very, very impactful. Once you start doing these, it's very hard not to get attached to the people that you meet doing this, and you can complain again. It's a great way to use your talent. And very few people know that transportation is, depending on which number you look at, number 2, number 3 barrier to accessing the health care that you need. So it's, again, another great opportunity to use this. So let's see here. Oops, and this is an example of me getting ahead of the slide deck here. So sorry about the technical glitch. We'll go back one more. And this is an interesting example here. Hopefully the video plays. Oh. We'll go back one more, and this will be our technical glitch for the day. Here we go. So, and I'll not let the video go, but you never know who's watching. The first time I was flying that family, and I'll just call her Baby Piper, unbeknownst to me, the Boston television channels had been notified by a development person at the hospital that we were arriving in Boston, and they had 3 television crews and had launched 2 helicopters to record our arrival. And again, I didn't know that. So luckily that particular day I hit center line, I taxied perfectly, and, was on TV that evening, and all 3 channels in Boston. And then Inside Edition decided to run, based on that TV series, decided to run a national piece promoting awareness and this particular baby's plight. So everybody's interested in these kind of stories. You're making a real impact, and again, it's a great opportunity to use your skill. So let's go on to the next one. So there's some really compelling numbers here to share as well. So the map is kind of interesting. So the green is everywhere in the US that's considered rural. And it's more than a 60-minute drive to get to a major urban center. And you can see that it almost seems like the majority of the country, is green. And there's sections of the East where you see high populations where there are still pockets. And that means it's going to be hard to get access to medical care or, any kind of support. And it doesn't matter whether you're a human or an animal, it also means that you're going to need support, that you can't just get around the corner. So other types of numbers that are always interesting that I review in different settings are, 6 million cancer appointments, treatment appointments are missed every year because of transportation. One of the bottom right one that's also interesting is AeroEducate and the AOPA STEM programs have been really generating awareness and getting content into high schools. But if you look at it, they've only gotten into about 1,400 high schools now, and there's 27,000 still out there. So again, the opportunities to work on things like discovery or career exploration, in addition to doing medical transport, they're just huge. So easy opportunity to find something that you can be passionate about. So this is just an example of different types of missions that I've personally flown. It's everywhere from turtles to veterans to kids for discovery to animals. It's a little bit of everything. And again, once you start, it's very, very compelling. And there's a lot of people that we try to get involved, even as students, through our IMC club, just to get them exposed. And once they're exposed, now they have a mission as to why they're flying. So today we'll run through these items, what really is public benefit flying, who can fly, what the Air Care Alliance is, the different types of charities and how it works. And then we'll also tie in some of the safety scenarios content that I've been working with the FAAST team. So let's go ahead and dive in. And again, if anyone has any questions during this, please let me know and stop, and happy to answer them in real time here. So the FAA's definition of what is public benefit flying is it's conducted by volunteers, general aviation aircraft, and it's a very general statement. It's just health and well-being of individuals, groups, and to the benefit of the general public. And that definition includes transport of animals, transport of cargo like blood or bone marrow, anything that's benefiting the general population. And the good news is in 2018, there was an FAA bill that clarified how we can take tax deductions for this. So for example, the variable cost, if I fly from Boston to Maine to New York and back to Boston for a particular nonprofit mission, I can deduct typically the variable cost of that flight, which would be fuel and any fees that I have to pay. There's a few organizations that have fuel reimbursement programs. That number is getting smaller over time just because it's an effort to get the waiver, and not a lot of pilots have been using it. Airport fees are usually always waived. Some of the organizations, including the ones Air Care Alliance supports, have unique call signs that you can use when you have a passenger on board. And in theory, air traffic control is not supposed to give you any kind of preference, but wink, wink, you get some preference while you're en routing and other things while you're doing these kind of flights. And then insurance, which is not necessarily covered by the Reauthorization Act, is typically set up per organization. Though the FAA Reauthorization Act in 2018 did limit your liability. So there haven't really been, fortunately, any need to test this in the courts. But it is something good to know that liability limits do exist. And not sure how many of you guys read FAA Safety Briefing magazine, but it's a great thing to subscribe to. It comes out every other month. This past issue went over philanthropic flying, and it's a really good overview of all the different kinds of flying that you can do as a volunteer. And again, thanks to the FAA for supporting us on these things. And then any pilot, any plane, if you can fly, there's an opportunity to go and volunteer. The different kinds of planes that I've flown are listed here. It's everything. Typically now I fly SR-22s and the Eclipse 500, but I've come up starting with a DA-40 and then the twins, a Columbia 350, a Meridian, a Matrix. So just about anything and everything. Every now and then, if I can't make a flight, the organizations have free airline tickets, or I'll actually just go ahead and pay for an airline ticket. There's, again, many, many ways to support anybody either in conservation or medical missions. But other types of volunteers, which is always kind of fun to talk about, we had an owner in New Hampshire that was flying a Cessna 152 into Boston Logan on a regular basis, and the controllers were terrific, fitting him in and taking good care to also make sure that he didn't get blown over by a plane during taxiing. So again, very, very, very few excuses not to go off and try to use your skill and your access to planes. And you can use rent.
We've got several viewers, I can tell from the chat, that are interested in volunteering that rent. I'm just curious, are there any special considerations I should have in mind when I'm looking at doing this with a rented airplane?
So the Cirruses that I fly are rented. So you can rent planes, you can borrow a plane. There's really no restriction. The organizations will need to prove that they have insurance, at least in the minimums that I just showed, which is $1 million and $100,000 per seat. But other than that, you can rent and fly all day long. The most common plane in most of these volunteer fleets is an SR-22 or a Cessna 182. But again, we have 152s, 172s, Warriors, you name it. So rental is certainly fine.
Excellent.
So let's see here. So the Air Care Alliance has been around a while, as you can see here. Started out helping organizations start volunteer organizations, so they're a resource for newly started volunteer groups. Now we're spending more time promoting volunteering, and I just became president, and we're now creating these focus areas, which is to create awareness about the availability of the types of services. Make sure that pilots are engaged, both new pilots, training pilots, and existing pilots, but make sure everyone's feeling involved and has an opportunity to volunteer, and really getting out there and promoting safety. Knock on wood, we've been fortunate to have very few accidents over the years, and we want to get continually better. So one of the missions, and this is an example of something I'm doing personally, is running monthly webinars on crash reviews and volunteer pilot safety scenarios. And we can go into more of that in a little bit. And then administrative support, we're a liaison to what we call the alphabets, which is to the FAA and to the federal government, trying to set up programs that support volunteering, answering questions that they may have. We have a new format for fuel reimbursement that we're trying to get introduced that will simplify getting us an opportunity to be paid for our fuel costs. So awareness to us means also leveraging organizations like NAFI, who have a lot of members, to get the word out about the availability of services. And pilots, same thing, making sure that we're collaborating to bring pilots into the opportunity. Safety, I just mentioned, the FAASTeam is allowing us to send out 500,000 emails a month promoting safety webinars. And in those safety webinars, we're promoting training, so that obviously directly impacts what you guys do. And then again, administrative support. And we are looking for support from other organizations to help us get the word out in a controlled, constructive manner. So this just gives you a smattering of an idea of the types of organizations that we have out there. Right now, about 18,000 pilots and 100,000 flights a year across all the different kinds of organizations. Right, we feel that we really want to have 10 times the number of pilots and 10 times the number of flights. The opportunities are really there. The highest number of flights are actually for animal rescue and medical care. Depending on the year's disaster relief may kick in and present a high number, but that's hit or miss in terms of year to year, thankfully. So the organizations are, for the most part, regional. Some organizations like STEM Flights and Pilots and PAWS are national. And what we try to do at Air Care Alliance is make it easy to join. You can fill out a pilot application on our site. And you'll see QR codes in certain slides along the way that allow you to get directly into that area to volunteer or to see if you have any questions that can be answered by the website FAQ section. So again, some examples of different types of volunteering and why somebody needs to go for medical care. Right now, and you'll see in a second we get into some more of this. Most times the hospital care that someone needs is not around the corner, and it could be 800 miles away, it could be 1,000 miles away, it could just be 100 miles away. That's where these organizations come in, and we need to get the awareness out, because a lot of times it's just word of mouth. The hospital social workers don't have a lot of time to ask somebody if they, how they're getting there. So again, patient word of mouth is a big way, but again, if we have other people in the community that can be spreading the word, that just helps. Same thing with animals, but most of it's rescue center to rescue center. And typically they're not nearby. It can be from Louisiana to Minnesota, it's considerable distance flights. And then we have veterans and families, but it may not be medical that we're providing support for. It may be just family support. And we'll go over a specific example of those kind of flights in a bit. Again, disaster relief, and then also unusual products. There's a flight every week from Phoenix to Las Vegas to deliver blood to Las Vegas. We're kind of an unusual thing. You wouldn't think that Las Vegas needs blood from somewhere else, but apparently they do. But for the most part, also those kind of shipments are to rural areas like Indian reservations or areas that have very little coverage. And then just exposing youth to aviation in general is a great way to fly. So I'm not sure how many of you guys know about Young Eagles. It's been around for a very, very long time. And this coming by Oshkosh this time next year, we hope to have 2.5 million flights, discovery flights done. So great organization, clearly having an impact, and easy to do. It can be any pilot type, any plane, experimental or certified. And in any given year, about 5,000 pilots may be active, but they've had over 50,000 pilots, participate over the years. So again, extremely impactful organization, easy to do, a lot of fun. And if you don't know about it, look up a local chapter and consider doing it. Another example of organizations that we fly for, and this is an organization in Maine, and there's similar organizations around the US. And this is an organization that deals with recalibrated veterans. And that means a veteran has at least one amputation. And they support the veterans directly with PTSD training, but also their families, so they can all get away and participate in somewhere where they're vacationing with peers and getting support that they may need. So there are a number of us, Veterans Airlift Command, Angel Flight organizations, Skyhope organizations, fly veterans to and from these type facilities in the US. And once you meet, again, these kind of individuals and their families, it's very humbling to be able to do this. It's a great opportunity. Travis himself, I'll go back to that. Travis Mills himself is a public speaker, a great guy. And if you want to learn, how resilient these individuals are, you should look him up on the web just as a general thing, as a general resource. So here's an example of what we're doing to promote safety and where you all can be helpful in getting the word out to students or anyone considering being a volunteer. So here's an example of where I was flying Travis back from Christmas visit, where he was also visiting with other vets in Michigan. And I'd flown about 750 miles to go get him. The first time I had flown him, he was with his father. And we were doing a public speaking event. And he drives a truck, he walks, as you can see in this picture. And he's a quad amputee and one of about a dozen ever to survive having that kind of injury in the field. So, he comes across as a very capable individual. After the fact, I realized that, I got him in the airplane. He couldn't attach his seatbelt. He couldn't undo his seatbelt. Is that something that, I should have done as a flight? So do better in the future, make sure in all of my safety scenarios that I set up to review in my webinar, go through, what went well, what could be done better, and go over some context. So in this case, definitely want to make sure that before we go off flying, veterans of any type, that we're aware of their limitations and make sure that they can safely get out of the plane should there be an emergency. So another example of people that actually are volunteer pilots, and I'm not sure if you recognize Tammy Jo here. I won't play her video, but she and her husband fly for Angel Flight South Central. She's a Southwest airline pilot that safely landed her 737 after having an uncontained engine failure, and she goes around advocating for volunteer flying in the Texas region. So this organization is a good example, again, of pilots that are extremely happy to be doing this and appreciate the opportunity to fly and the excuse to fly. And in their case, they're doing much more than just medical. They're doing flying court advocates around blood and also relief aid. So again, depending on the organization and where you're interested in flying, you can find any excuse to fly that may be of interest. Another example of a safety scenario that, again, you may find interesting. It comes up, and it doesn't come up until you do start doing a number of medical flights, because most of the times the people are ambulatory. They don't necessarily look like they're dealing with an affliction, but then you run across a situation where it's extremely obvious that someone has a challenging medical condition. So in this case, this particular scenario, the little guy in the top left had 70% burns, no fingers, a trach tube, a wig, and clearly had been dealing with some really tough situations. And I was startled. I was at Boston Logan. I had to compose myself before I went over to introduce myself, and I still then had to navigate taxiing at a very busy Bravo and flying them to Philadelphia, back home. So there's no easy way to assess, how you're going to deal with, the different types of medical situations you may run into. But what we did do as a result of this is the technology now includes descriptions of the medical conditions, so you as a pilot can make a more informed decision about what you feel you can handle. The young girl in the middle of this series of pictures has a very challenging disease where the children don't live for very long. And, she was 25 in this picture and an amazing example of endurance. And the little girl on the bottom left had a stereotaxis holding her face together as they were reconstructing it after an accident. So again, things that you need to think about whether you can handle, but once you start flying these type of people, you really, it's hard not to want to do more. And again, sharing that with your students or your community, I think just makes for more passionate flying. They really have a strong why.
Mark, do you think there is such a thing as a passenger condition that is too much for a volunteer pilot who's not used to this, or is this more of a personal threshold, personal growth kind of thing, learning to deal with that? Does that make sense?
It does, because I've been doing this about 15 years now. And when I started, I was not aware, and the industry of doing these volunteer flights, though it had been around 20 years at that point, wasn't acting like a mature industry. Things were still, people were still learning things. So the patients have to be stable and ambulatory. They get a medical release and everybody's signed off. And it's really up to the individual volunteer pilot organizations. And that's what we call Angel Flight New England, Angel Flight South Central. these are all discrete organizations. We're trying to get everybody to use the same processes now. And that's one of Air Care Alliance's roles, is driving out standard processes to let you as a pilot see the condition of the passenger and not be surprised. So you can work within your tolerance. And then there's other things that we learned, and I don't have that in here, but I'll talk to it. And that is what happens if a passenger has epilepsy. The last thing you want to have happen in a 172 is to have a passenger in that tight a quarter have a seizure.
Right.
And what happened to me, I was connecting with another pilot, and we were flying 2 parents and an infant, and the infant had epilepsy. And we were told, and we had signed waiver, that the infant was stable and the parents were going to Boston to get an assessment. So first 2 legs, no problem. Third leg, after their appointment, I'm flying. I meet with the pilot, hand off the passengers to the next pilot. And in cruise, baby starts to have a seizure. Parents start panicking. And, we're in eclipses. So he's in, 35,000 feet, and he has to get on the ground. So we then basically said, okay, lesson learned. If you have a seizure disorder of any type, we're just not doing those flights anymore, period. We can't put our pilots, in any kind of stressful, unpredictable environment. And then we began to back off to fine tune and work with the medical industry to say, what is a reasonable assurance that we won't have this kind of emergency in a flight. So, and it varies by organization now, but it's usually somewhere seizure-free 3 to 5 years. Physicians signed off that they're stable, that they're no longer having seizures. But that type of information is still disclosed in the comments for that particular mission. So you as a pilot can just say, no, I'm not flying anyone even remotely, capable of having any kind of seizure. So again, we're in control of who we put in our plane, and the organizations are responsible for making sure we're informed about what are the conditions of the people that we could be flying. So, and that's a good example. And I'm going to go to another example here. And there's two scenarios here. One is crying baby. I'm not sure how many people fly with babies in their planes. And if you're not used to doing that, babies cry, and the intensity of that can vary. So what do you do if you're a pilot with, a crying baby in your airplane? Do you get on the ground and divert and have them deal with it on the ground, or do you push through? In this first scenario, there's also squall lines to deal with, and it was worse than forecast. In the second scenario, first time little boy has, unfortunately, brain cancer. Parents have not flown in small planes. Only the mom and a nursing infant are doing the flight. The father is staying back with another child. And, in the middle of flight, uncontrollable screaming. And this was one of my flights. So loud that air traffic control offers to help by clearing me direct to the airport, and that I can have any approach and any runway. So, air traffic control, and this is just an example, of air traffic control wanting to help and coming up with ways to proactively help. So in both cases, did well, didn't react to like it was an emergency. The plane wasn't falling out of the sky or anything. So again, managed to have the adult deal with the crying child, and we just got on the ground and let them, deal with traveling the rest of the way by ground. And the passengers and the organizations always have a plan B. So even if you can't do the flight, they're going to get to where they need to go. And if it happens en route, all the organizations have seen this before, and there's usually some kind of plan to get them to their destination. In the second scenario where we had the screaming child, the challenge is how do you assess whether that's going to happen, because it's the first time flying. So we tried to go over with parents now more proactively what can happen to, during a flight and ways to deal with it, but it's not going to be a perfect process. And you as a pilot may not want to take people, and it's always disclose whether this is their first flight or their 20th or 100th flight, so you know whether they're an experienced passenger or not. But if it's a first-time flight, you may need to decide whether you want to take anybody ever because it's their first-time flight and you don't want to be surprised. So in this particular case, there's another lesson learned. And so air traffic control had proactively offered me, to land anywhere I wanted. And they were landing that day, and I believe it was on the ILS 34. But I was coming from the west, so the easiest runway was not that. It was the shorter downward sloping runway that I'd never landed on at White Plains. So I just said, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'll just take the short runway and I'll get on the ground in a hurry. And because of that, I was rushed and probably didn't have my best landing, and I used every foot of the runway. And as soon as the plane pulled off the runway, the child stopped screaming. So I probably should have just stuck to my standard flows, gone with the flow, not rushed. And even though air traffic control had the best intentions, maybe not worth the distraction of trying to come up with another non-standard way of getting on the ground. And there's many examples like this. So again, just, where can distractions come from? How are you going to deal with it? And that's the kind of scenarios that we're writing up and trying to share. And we want to be able to share with your community of instructors and have you have an excuse to meet with your clients more often to share these kind of scenarios, because they may not have ever run into them and probably never would run into them unless they see it here. So conservation flights, I'm not sure if you have all heard about those, but they can be for any number of things. They can be transporting a turtle, it can be transporting an endangered wolf, it can be surveying floodplains, forestries, and this particular example is assessing a forest canopy, and it can be very low and slow to the ground. So a lot of times the organizations that are supporting these kind of conservation efforts have higher requirements for pilots and planes, because you're doing something that you don't typically do in your normal modes of flight. Lighthawk is one of the bigger national programs, and South Wings is one in the southeastern US. Both are very active and doing very good work for a variety of different organizations. But related scenario here, I'm not sure how many of you have dealt with over-the-counter drugs and have had that discussion, and hydration, have had those discussions with your clients. In this particular case, and this is me again, had an early morning flight, didn't feel quite on my game. Voice was rough, scratchy, dry, but nothing I hadn't necessarily felt before, and I didn't feel bad doing pre-flight. So took off, had 2 passengers, had forgotten to bring water bottles, and I'd woken up very early, doing the usual drill, getting the dogs out, getting them on their medication, having coffee, breakfast, and driving half an hour to the airport. But at 3 a.m. that day, I'd gotten up to take 2 Pepto because I had a little bit of heartburn from a spicy dinner. When I did land after this first leg, I checked in with my wife because it was upstate Maine where I usually go. And she said, "Hey, do you know that you took 2 Benadryl last night?" Because I'd left the Pepto bottle on the counter. And we had just returned from an Africa trip, and in Africa, Benadryl is not allowed in some countries. So she had used the Pepto bottle to store both Pepto-Bismol and Benadryl, which has a very similar color. So I said, aha. So, maybe that's why I wasn't necessarily feeling totally on my game. And also, again, probably I was not well hydrated. So I decided to do better by reading up more on what over-the-counter medication does to you, and also understand better about hydration. So the FAA suggests whatever 5 times the dosage. So if you take something 4 times a day, you would take that dosage number in hours and multiply that times 5, and that's how much time you should leave before you go fly. And I had not looked up that number until after I got back home. So otherwise I would have hung out a bit longer. And then same thing with hydration. I didn't realize that once you feel thirsty, you're already behind the curve, and it's going to be very hard to catch up. And some of those impairments are scratchy voice, may not be speaking as clearly as you need to speak to deal with air traffic control in an efficient way. So in this particular day, I did delay leaving a little bit, had some more coffee, and to do research to figure out, how not to get caught by this in the future. So very important topic, I think, to review with, whether you're doing students, or in my case, I mentor a lot of new volunteer pilots.
See if you can do it all by yourself. And then
so cool.
Yeah. So
I can brag to all my friends about this.
See if you can do it all by yourself. And then
so cool.
So that young girl, quadriplegic, was experiencing one of several kinds of discovery flights, and she was in foster care, and her autistic foster care sibling was also flying that day. And we'd also considered having them fly in the STEM program, but instead had another organization. But not sure if you guys have heard of STEM flights or Aeroeducate, but there's many ways for children, especially teenagers, to get exposed to aviation careers.
You can change kids in your
STEM
community,
flights,
right where you live, anywhere in the United States. We help you find the kids, you fly them, and you inspire the next generation to pursue aviation and aerospace careers.
So STEM flights is a very easy way for anyone in the country to get to spend a one and done type event with a teenager, introducing them to either an aviation pilot career or an aviation engineering career. And you get given a syllabus. These are, again, a lot of fun to do, can be in any kind of plane with any certificate. So again, easy to get hooked. So this does come back to another safety scenario. Who should be in the co-pilot seat, and how do we assess whether they impact the safety of flight? In the particular case of the young girl that you see here as a quadriplegic, it took 2 of us to get her into a Columbia 350 to go for her flight, and her autistic brother was in the back seat. So in this case, I didn't assess until afterwards whether they could have safely gotten out of the plane with, under their own power, following instructions. And the answer probably is no. So it did result in a policy change where we said, children with any kind of these, this type of challenge needs to fly with another adult. And we need to have a plan to make sure that they can exit the airplane in an emergency should they need to do that. And the other case is had a 9-year-old who fortunately was not that big and strong, who just decided to grab the controls and not let go. And it was easy to overpower them. That was not predicted, seemed to be following instructions during the pre-flight meeting. So again, as pilots, we need to think through what we're going to do in all these kind of scenarios. I'm sure it's something as instructors you guys do on a regular basis. But for volunteer pilots, that may just be private or instrument, something that they're not necessarily getting exposed to during their training and should. Another example of something during a STEM event, and I'll sort of summarize this one pretty quickly, is had a crowd with the pilot alone managing the family going to see the student do a pre-flight on the plane, and one of the family members wandered off. So that was not good. And when I noticed that they had wandered off, they were going towards training planes that had their engines running. So not a good situation. Luckily, the lineman was nearby, and I was able to get them to help. So we had to implement something where we had a ground person responsible for controlling any family members that were walking ever, and they would stay with those family members until the flight departed. So little things, again, that you would think it would be common sense for people to stay together and common sense to manage that, but when you're flying with family members that may be in a group larger than you're used to dealing with, you may have to deal with ramp control issues. And again, I don't remember getting taught much about ramp control when I was going through my lessons and things that we should work into the schedule. So I will go on from there. So how does this all work? So I'm going to click all three here. So somebody needs to know that they can ask for a flight, whether it's to fly a turtle, fly a person to medical care, fly to a camp, relocate blood, go for a discovery flight. They need to know where to go look. Once they find an appropriate organization, they can request a flight, and there's a whole vetting process around that. The volunteer pilot organization, if it's medical related, will make sure they get waivers, make sure they get a medical release. They'll tell people about baggage limitations, things like that. And they'll give the passenger a general briefing about what to expect. Pilots, we get to see a list of all the available flights, and we can start to pick what we want, what kind of missions that we think we want to do. Do we want to do a discovery mission? Do we want to do a cancer camp type mission, only fly veterans, only fly people with cancer? Most of the organizations will provide us with enough information for us to, do something where we have a personal link to the type of mission. The other thing that we need to then do is make sure that we do very good passenger briefings before they even get to the airport. We don't want to have any surprises once they do get to the airport. And then again, before we get in the plane, do another comprehensive briefing. Whether, again, during normal training, do we ever go over that? Probably not enough. Most of the onboarding pilot processes, and I'll discuss that in a second, try to mentor pilots on how to do that well. But it would also be important for an instructor to be doing that kind of thing. Excuse my voice. So how do you sign up as a pilot? And the process may look daunting. You need to find an organization that you want to fly for. You can go on the Air Carolines website and find a list of all the organizations in your area, or you can do a very short version of a pilot application, and it will recommend organizations in your area and actually publish your contact information to those organizations, who then may in turn contact you. So find the organization, evaluate the requirements, choose one that matches your skill set, submit an application. The organization will check you out just to make sure that you're a good match and meet their qualification requirements. The qualification requirements range between 250 hours in a private license all the way up to 1,000 hours in an instrument rating. And you can fly in basic med. There's usually a pilot orientation step, and this goes over things, again, like pilot briefing, what to expect, how to select a mission, how to look at nuances like, what type of illness they may have. Go there. Once you request a mission that you like, the volunteer pilot organization will make sure it's a good match for your airplane and your particular skill set, and then you're off to the races. You can go off and do a flight, and you can repeat that as many times as you want. We encourage most people to take a public benefit flying course that's available in the AOPA Safety Institute. That course is listed here. Most of the organizations need proof of completion of that course, but it takes less than 30 minutes, and it just goes through an end-to-end process. Then moving on, the safety considerations that we would like to see you guys addressing with your students, either new students or with people doing their IPCs or their BFRs, include these. And these are the considerations that you may have seen in the safety seminars or scenarios that I just shown you. I won't go into these. These are probably very easy and obvious to you. So we have a list of scenarios that I've been working on for the last 9 months, and we're working on a way to make sure that these are readily available to the general public. These are things that we think that you would be able to review with your clients and make them safer pilots. And we can provide more information after this webinar tonight, should you be interested. And I want to make sure that I'm not running out of time here, guys. Do I have time for 1 or 2 more scenarios?
Yeah, I think we can squeeze one more scenario in.
Okay, great. So this is one that you may grabbed out of the headlines here. So this particular pilot in the Northwest US flies kids to cancer camp, and he has a mall. And he has to fly over a body of water, and he usually has the passengers put on their flotation devices before they get in the airplane, so he's not having to deal with making sure they've put it on. And these are kids, so he wants to make sure they're on correctly should they need to be using them. He's been dealing with the fact that the people are sometimes put off by the fact that they have to wear these flotation devices. So what we've suggested is that during the pre-flight call that he cover that with the parents, so they're not surprised when they get to the airport, and that he sends some kind of content that shows them what's going to be expected of them. One thing, though, that he was not carrying is he didn't have a flotation go bag, with a radio or other support information, support equipment, and he didn't carry a 4-person life raft, which is only 15 pounds. So he would have had room for that. So how do you improve on things like this? So you may have seen information about the Cirrus crash in Lake Michigan. I think it's almost a month ago now. And engine failure, a little bit past midway over the lake. The plane went down. The chute was visible for a while. There was a plane in the area that was found them and was circling over them. The plane sunk before rescue. The plane that was flying over them lost sight of the people standing on the wing once the plane sunk. So they had to wait 40 minutes in the water to be rescued by boat. There was no Coast Guard helicopter or other aviation solution available to them. So when I looked at the TV reports of this accident, they were wearing maroon-colored life vests with no lights. So they had no portable ELT. They didn't have bright-colored life vests. And again, no easy way for them to be found. And luckily, the boats did find them based on this plane circling over the location. So lots of easy lessons to go over. It's not just safe to have your life jackets in the plane and have them available. So that was, I won't go into the poor runway thing, but another thing to be careful about, I'll do really fast because it's one of my pet peeves, is runway conditions are not accurately reported in a lot of places. So if you have the time, use the AOPA resource, which often has runway condition reports that are more accurate than ForeFlight or AirNav. And with that, I will jump to the end here. And I will say, I'd like to work with your community on distributing safety materials like these scenarios. Help to make sure that instructors know that this matters and that we want to work on proficiency and mastery wherever we can and give you support to do that. Suggest that you do a volunteer flight with either a student or with one of your regular recurrent clients, just to give them an opportunity to feel that passion and that reason to fly more often. And then come up, perhaps if you have the time to think through this, come up with a client-specific mastery program or safety program that also revolves around the kind of volunteering that they may be interested in doing.
I was going to ask you, and it sounds like the answer is yes. Are several of these organizations or a lot of them okay with an instructor carrying out a mission with a student, coming along?
These scenarios can be, the instructor needs to be a pilot for that particular organization. The student can go along, but the student cannot be at the controls during the patient carrying leg. So that would be the only caveat.
Gotcha.
But definitely a reason to do it. There's been instructors doing this, and we hope to see that more often. There's also a lot of first-time, pilots that are experienced pilots, but they want to fly with someone on their first mission. So taking an instructor along, we encourage a lot. And again, having an extra person along on any of these kind of missions is good to deal with the passengers should the passengers have any questions. So I think that's it. And also always consider the WINGS program, and that makes us safer pilots. So I think that's it for my content, unless there's additional questions. Or
So I'm going to advance this one slide here so we can have your email address and your QR code up. And so those scenarios, to me as an instructor, are high value, Mark. So if an instructor here wants access to scenarios, can they just email you and get a PDF?
Please email me. We're working on how to best distribute these as well. Right now there's a monthly webinar. We've done 9 of them where we share the scenarios in a video format. And they're on the Air Care Alliance YouTube channel. So we'll be making them more readily available as time goes and we learn the best way to do that. But by all means, email me, please.
Nice. So we've got a little... You asked a question up front, kind of who do we have in the audience, and Bob has sort of tabulated for us, and it sounds like about 40% of those who answered them are involved in volunteer flights, but about 60% aren't yet, but they want to. So hopefully they gave them something good to think about tonight.
Well, that'd be great. Yeah, thanks for doing that, and thanks to all of you that are already volunteering. And again, anyone either already volunteering or looking to volunteer, please, email me with any questions. Again, I'm passionate about doing this, as you might figure out by now. And I've been hooked in many, many ways. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, Mark. Like I said, I've been excited about this one ever since we spoke at Oshkosh, and I think it was worth the wait. So we were really glad to have you and hope we can do this again.
Yep, great. Thanks so much, guys.
So like to have everybody join us again next month for MentorLIVE number 98. We've got Dr. Greg Pinnell from AirDocs, Air Medical Support Services, is going to cover several current hot topics in the medical certification world. I know one of them is the new color vision issue that I've had a few customers have had problems with. So make sure you're in tune for that. I've seen some previews. It's going to be a really good one on November 19th. Again, I would tell you to earn your WINGS credit, but put a sticky note on your monitor and come back and do that once the government's open. But certainly, if you're not a NAFI member, you know what I'm going to say, join NAFI. We'd love to have you. And I'll make the offer that, Mark, when y'all have the PDFs organized however you want them, we on the NAFI side can add them to the additional information tab there on the broadcast page for this course as well, so that can live there forever. I've already told you guys, get your WINGS credit, but do it when the government's back open. And don't forget, again, 28 really good WINGS credit bearing presentations from Summit 2023. If you were there, You probably missed one or two, so go back and watch what you missed. If you weren't there, watch all 28. I was there. They were all really good. That QR code's super handy. So with that, again, thank you, Mark. Thank you all for joining us. And man, I can't believe I'm saying this, but we'll see you next month in November. Thank you all. Have a great night.